this morning with my mind. Staying on Jesus. I woke up this morning with my mind.
Hello everyone, Joey Sparks here. This is your reminder, God's mercies are new once again this morning. I love the list of the qualities of love, 16 of them. In fact, in 1 Corinthians chapter 13, one that we probably overlook is the list of qualities in Romans chapter 12 in terms of a complete body of qualities. Now, I'm sure there are several that we pull out that are helpful and that we remember. But I would think it's a great time right now as we read and reread through Romans to do some work and some study of this whole block, beginning in chapter 12, verse 9, and going through the end of the chapter even. One of the things, and that's probably one of the things that's most familiar from this verse, or from this chapter, is one verse, verse 18. If possible, so far as it depends on you, live peaceably with all. So if possible, so far as it depends on you, live peaceably with all. It's a great sentiment. Powerful, challenging sentiment. And I catch myself thinking about it from time to time and challenging myself to put it into practice. But I'm always coming up short and realizing how difficult it really is. And I think that's one of the sentiments that Paul is going to address later in the book. When you get to chapter 14, into chapter 15 then, Paul addresses those issues where there's some disagreement. There's some disagreement not only about what we should do, but there's disagreement about what does God desire. Chapter 14 highlights that those differences happen. How will the church respond when they do happen? So we can list the issues they were facing in the first century, and I'm kind of prone to dive into that study. That's interesting, and yet those are different issues than what we face today that threaten to divide us. So Paul reminds us in chapter 14 that those who are weak must be careful not to look at the strong in judgment. At those who might have a stricter view of certain things that God expects. Be careful that you don't look to others who are confident in different things out of judgment. But then he says to the strong, you may be confident in what you're practicing and you're confident that it comes from the Lord, but you must not put stumbling blocks in the ways of the paths of your weaker brethren, those who are alongside you. So each, the strong and the weak, have a responsibility to each other. And I think it needs to be mentioned that by the time you get to the end of this discussion, chapter 14 and into chapter 15, there's a need and a necessity for the strong to help the weak become strong. Like, let's work through this. Let's not just leave it this way for decades. But there does need to be a sense of patience and understanding and eliminate harsh judgmentalism, but also eliminate the stumbling block allowance where we say, I'm going to do what I'm going to do, and it doesn't matter who it offends. We need to be careful of avoiding either extreme. Paul then repeats chapter 14, verse 18, so then let us pursue what makes for peace and for mutual upbuilding. And we need to be careful because that's not just a common vote. We don't just take a vote as to what might be peaceful or mutually upbuilding, but we do what is acceptable to God through Christ. And we all have that attitude that brings us closer together in peace. So it's out of that attitude then that we consider how kind of Paul begins to wrap this discussion up. Romans chapter 15, let each of us please his neighbor for his good to build him up. For Christ did not please himself, but as it is written, the reproaches of those who reproached you fell on me. Christ came and he bore our weaknesses. He bore with us through our weaknesses. Therefore, we have an example and a pattern to follow in helping one another. Whether we would consider ourselves the strong or the weak, that's kind of the sticky part of this passage, is that whenever we read this, we always think we're the strong person. And the point is to never allow some of these issues to divide us beyond what God would want. So let's go back to the example of Christ and let's seek Him for the peace. Let's be sure that we, above all, are not the sources of division, but instead we're living peaceably with all. We thank you for your time this morning, and it's our prayer that God's timeless word will be your meditation all day today.
I woke up this morning